So it's really exciting to be here and really be able just to talk about my experiences. Dr. Gerber did, yep, mentioned if it was being recorded. So there's that. And then I wanted to check before diving too deep into my presentation if there was a wait list for other people who might be trying to get into the presentation. I sent the link out to some people, other students at U of L, but I have heard that some are not being able to get into the presentation just yet. So I wanted to see if there were any like on a wait list or in a waiting room.
Okay.
I wasn't able to directly click on the link. I had to copy and paste it into a browser. Maybe that's an issue some people are having.
Okay. Let me relay that message. I have to. Thank you, Dr. Swain.
Sure.
Copy and paste the link into a browser.
I'll send out the link. I just copied it from in here and I'll send that out on the listservs that it went out to this morning.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Dr. Gerber. Cool. So I will go ahead and share my screen, and then we can get started. Okay, slideshow presentation. So again, thank you everyone for joining this presentation. This is basically just a look into my path into starting my career at Facebook, or now currently Meta, with the rebranding that happened, I'd say a few weeks ago. Again, my name is Richard Wilson, the second, technically, yeah. I was born and raised here in Louisville, Kentucky. For those of you who are familiar with Louisville, I went to DuPont Manual High School, so it's kind of like that Castle High School across the street from campus. As mentioned, I graduated from U of L in this past May with a bachelor's in industrial engineering, and then I started my master's of engineering and engineering management, and I'll graduate with that this upcoming May. I was also a Porter Scholar, which had a significant impact on my experiences and just being able to attend this university. While in undergrad, I also co-founded my first tech startup called Happen, which wasn't really required for any of the classes that I did, but was just a great experience for me. It really taught me a lot about product development, maintaining relationships, just trying to figure out how I could challenge myself, both inside and outside of the classroom. I also had some other experiences that are kind of in two buckets, if you will. One is in non-engineering experiences, and then one is in specific engineering experiences. For the non-engineering experiences, I worked with an organization called the Takeoff Institute, where I did a research fellowship project over the summer 2020 months, which was really interesting. With Ripple Ventures, I was an investment fellow, and Ripple Ventures is based in Toronto, Canada. So I worked with them in fall 2020, and then towards the end of fall 2020, I worked with an organization called Paragon One, which is when I did my Facebook Marketing Intelligence externship, and we'll talk more about exactly what that looks like. Specific to engineering experiences, I did my first two co-ops with UPS and Supply Chain Solutions. I did my third co-op with UPS and Airlines, and then before I started at U of L, so the summer after graduating from high school, I interned at GE. More recently, I've had a couple of features come out, one in Forbes that came out in October of 2021, so just last month, and then there's a local organization here called the Lincoln Foundation, and I had a feature come out with them actually a couple of days ago, or like last week, so that's also been pretty exciting. Aside from all of the educational and professional things, some of my favorite things are learning how to make new vegetarian recipes. I've been trying this and have actually been vegetarian for about a year, so that's been pretty cool. I also really enjoy 80s and 90s R&B, and even kind of sounded like, if you will. Just a side note, Anderson .Paak and Bruno Mars had a new album come out. They had a new album come out about last week, and it sounds just like it would have come out, I guess, in the 1980s, which has been really good and really great for me to just like kind of listen to. So if you have any recommendations regarding those, then please send them my way. And then I've also been playing tennis for about 16 or 17 years. So I enjoy doing that and just really having fun in those activities as well. So to kind of like start explicitly with how I got to Facebook, I started as a Paragon 1 extern, and Paragon 1 is a educational tech startup that seeks to pair students with remote externships with partnership companies. Remote externships are basically this notion that you can do work asynchronously and remotely from wherever you are, but can still deliver value from a partnership company that Paragon 1 has a relationship with. So these companies include Facebook, Snapchat, Nat Geo Wild, PricewaterhouseCoopers or PwC. There's a lot of like big tech consulting companies, all of other research organizations. I think Pfizer also has a partnership with Paragon 1. And so I found out about this from another fellow that was in my cohort with the Takeoff Institute. He just mentioned that there was an opportunity to do it and that it was marketing. And with me being an engineering student, I didn't really know if marketing would like make sense to me to kind of like jump into. But I felt that, you know, it wouldn't really hurt, and I felt that I had the bandwidth to kind of focus on that. And so I decided to apply for the externship. I interviewed and was accepted into it in, I'd say, October of 2020. And then November and December of 2020, I did my externship with Facebook in Paragon 1, where I just focused on marketing. I looked at social media influencers and a lot of information and research just like within that realm of things. After I completed my externship in December of 2020, I'd say around February, I received an email from a recruiter based in the LA office at Facebook, and he was reaching out to me about a new role opening up in the Global Operations Division, and he just asked me if I was interested in it. Prior to this, I didn't really know what global operations was, but I came pretty quickly to find out that global operations is basically the division that keeps Facebook and all of its subsidiaries in operation basically every day. And we really seek to provide an optimal experience for all of our users on all of the platforms. All those platforms do include the Facebook platform itself. It includes Instagram. It includes WhatsApp, which is a messaging service that is very big internationally. It also includes Messenger, and then it includes Oculus, which is more of like a VR aspect of Facebook. After expressing interest in doing this role, I prepared for and completed behavioral interviews, case interviews, and Super Day interviews, and we'll definitely talk more about what those were like and all those details. After doing my final round of Super Day interviews, I reassessed the opportunity and follow-up conversations with some of my interviews and my recruiter. I was fortunate to have other offers to kind of decide between, and so we'll talk more about that as well. But then ultimately decided to accept the offer for the DevOps team, which is under the Global Operations Division. Before going too deep into what my interviewing process is like, I think one of the most important things to really focus on is the resume. I think it is an initial impression that you can really provide to whoever is kind of getting to know you professionally. And so I think that it's really important to talk about how I structure my resume and things of that nature, just to make sure that we're presenting ourselves in the best way possible. Some of the key points that I really talk about is to make sure that you are focusing largely on your personal impact and your experiences. A lot of people organize their resume in a bunch of different ways. I've seen typically two ways that really work, whether it's being in order of importance or chronological order. I decided to order my resume in terms of importance because I wanted to make sure that the first experiences that recruiters were seeing on my resume were the ones that I felt were most impactful, were most important for me. But I was still able to weave and kind of stitch together all of my experiences to tell a cohesive narrative. Also, consider having multiple sections of your resume. You can talk about your education, your work experiences, professional development, any volunteering experience or skills and interests. I think are also great to include in your resume. But make sure that you have nice and logical flow to how your resume is kind of laid out. I think it's really, really important to start off every bullet point or line with the effect or the impact that you personally contributed I think that, when you have so many resumes that are being flooded for recruiters, they're trying to figure out how can they pull out the nuggets that this person has said that they have contributed in their previous experiences. And so when you can effectively, display how you've done things in the past and just make sure that you're communicating that clearly, then you can then transfer that understanding from you to them, and that can provide more insight onto how you are going to be able to contribute and really make an impact in a specific role on the specific team at whatever company you are applying for. I also think it's super important to quantify and specify wherever possible. There are definitely NDAs and specific information that can't really be shared, and that's completely understandable. But if you are able to put in numbers or percentages or anything that's super specific to give an idea to whoever's viewing your resume what you've been able to do, then that gives a tangible touch point for whoever's viewing your resume to know what type of candidate you are, and again, the kind of work that you've done. The caveat to doing this is to make sure that you're being realistic. And I say this because, again, recruiters, they get thousands and really tens of thousands of resumes all the time. And so when they're sifting through information and trying to figure out, what you've done, you want to make sure that you're conveying the right information, but you don't want to, fabricate your experiences. And you want to make sure that you don't, find yourself in a situation where it's more of an embarrassment if you say something that isn't really true or isn't the case. Definitely, if it is true, if it is the case, make sure that you are clearly communicating that and talk about all the numbers and metrics. But make sure you're just being realistic.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Richard. Yeah, your voice is not clear for us. Would you mind change your mic, or is it able to rejoin or call your phone, something like that?
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
Sorry. Give me just a second.
Sure.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I'm still on my laptop microphone. I'm not sure what happened.
We can hear you okay. You're just a little muffled.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. So let me see. Okay, I will call in from my phone, and then we'll see how that works.
Welcome to the audio conferencing center.
Hello?
Hello. Hey, Richard.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it works.
All
It's
good now?
clear.
Okay, cool. I can go back over this slide. Yeah, I'll go back over this slide. So again, just making sure that you are talking about your personal experiences. Make sure that you are ordering things in importance or chronologically. I also think that it's super important to make sure that you have a bunch of specific sections and just ultimately talk about things in a logical order to make sure that things are clear and coherent for anyone that's really understanding or looking at your resume. Again, start off every bullet point with the specific contribution that you made just so that recruiters or whoever's looking at your resume can see what specific work that you've done previously, because in doing that, that provides insight into what you can then contribute in the future. And then, whenever you're starting off with your personal impact or the effect that you've had, make sure that you're quantifying everything wherever possible, but make sure that you're being realistic, because you do want to, kind of showcase what you've been able to do, but you don't want to position yourself in a light that kind of fabricates your previous experiences. I think another thing is super important is to make sure that you are, just sticking to one page. At the absolute smallest, I think your font size should be a size 10. More, if any larger, closer to like a size 12 should be the smallest. And I think, using standard fonts like Times New Roman, Calibri, Arial, easily digestible fonts are super important, because, you don't want people squinting trying to read your resume. You want to make sure that, whenever they have their first attempt in trying to read it, they're able to get the information that they need the first time. Additionally, I think it's really important to kind of personify yourself. I mean, companies, I don't think, are hiring, they're not hiring robots. They're hiring a human, they're hiring a person. So I think it's important to kind of talk about, what do you do for fun, or what interests do you have, or, what are you passionate about? And I think that being able to communicate that can kind of speak to, the contribution that you can make to the overall culture and the community of an organization. Because again, they're not just hiring they're just not hiring a worker, they're hiring someone that they hope to contribute to the overall culture. This last thing is something that is a bit more specific to those who have a lot of different experiences that kind of don't fit all into one resume. And my advice here is to consider having multiple resumes to highlight different experiences. I think that for myself, I ended up having 2 different resumes, one that was engineering specific and then one that was non-engineering specific. And that non-engineering specific resume kind of highlighted my entrepreneurial experiences, my venture capital experiences, and things of that nature. At the same time, I think that in doing that, it can kind of cater what your experiences are going to, or like which resume you should use for specific job applications. And so it's just a consideration if you do have multiple or too many experiences to kind of fit on one resume. Here is kind of jumping into my overall application strategy. And initially, I think we're going to start talking about networking. Especially when you don't know someone at a specific company or don't know anyone there, and it's really of interest for you to work there. I think it makes sense to kind of network with people who are currently in that role or at the company that you really want to work for. This can happen by examining people who are within your network or your network's network. I've also heard that you can have a better or a higher likelihood of receiving a response from those who are more entry level. I personally have not had that experience, but wanted to go ahead and pass on that information in case it is useful for anyone else. I used LinkedIn a lot in trying to connect with people, understand what their experiences were like. I do think the caveat to LinkedIn is that you have to make sure that you have a reasonably developed profile. So that includes having a profile picture, having an updated headline, recent experiences in your experience section, showing that you're active on LinkedIn by liking people's posts or reposting certain things that are interesting to you. I think that can be a great way to make some initial bridges to people who you might not have a previous connection with. Also, attending web conferences is great, and then if able to receive email introductions to specific people. I think that's another great way to establish some initial commonality when reaching out to people. I think at the same time, when reaching out to people, it's a lot better and a lot more effective to establish a relationship with a person before making a specific ask. When you establish a relationship over some time, you're giving that person the time to get to know who you are, what your interests are, what your experiences are. And so if the time ever does come that you do make an ask, there's something to kind of there's something to point back to for that person rather than having the initial interaction and kind of be more of an ask or a request for them for your personal name. This next bullet is just talking about internal referrals, which internal referrals are basically opportunities where a current employee will make a referral for an applicant to a specific role. It's not always possible. If it is possible, I think it can definitely help. In my networking kind of experiences, I was fortunate to have received an internal referral. But at the same time, internal referrals do not guarantee an offer in any way. We've definitely heard about instances where people received an internal referral and still didn't necessarily result in an offer. But I think it can definitely help in making sure that your profile is at least examined or at least evaluated by the hiring managers or the people who are doing the recruiting. And then also as you're conducting these interactions and these interviews, we're just talking to people, make sure that you researching the opportunity available and have some initial questions. I think that when you have initial questions that are a bit different than the typical what is your job like or what's your favorite part, it helps you remain a lot more memorable from those conversations, and it can help you really stick in the mind of people who are oftentimes the decision makers when it comes time for final decisions to be made. Right now, I'm going to talk specifically about my interview prep and what that experience was like. I think that in every interview, it is extremely important to know the company's mission and to know the job description. I think it can be a bit cliche, if you will, but knowing the company mission and job description has come up in just about every interview that I've done in all of the companies, and I think that it's an indicative sign of what your commitment is to furthering that company's mission. And so when you're able to display that you not only know the mission but can internalize it and kind of reflect that reflect that in a role that you aspire to have, it just makes you a stronger applicant and candidate. My first round was through one-way video interviews, which were basically I received a question on my screen and then I recorded my response to that question, where I had just about a couple of minutes to respond to the question. If there are any provided prep documents via email, be sure to thoroughly examine those. Every company doesn't necessarily provide them, but I do think that they can be insightful to have. And so, if they are available, make sure that you're examining them, make sure you know them inside and out, upside down, every which way possible. Make sure that you're super familiar with those. I also think that it's super important to think about your previous experiences and have a variety of experiences to kind of speak on when you're answering these questions. And so for me, I talked about my experience with my startup. I talked about my experience doing co-ops. I talked about my experiences with my capstone research projects. Just had a variety of experiences to kind of pick from, so that I'm not referencing the same experience every time, but that I have a variety of things that I can kind of pick from when responding to these questions. Again, prepare for behavioral questions, which behavioral questions at large are assessing, how have you responded in previous experiences? And so it could be like, tell me about a time when you have worked on a team, or tell me about a time when an unexpected interaction happened and you had to pivot your approach. Things of that nature, I think, are typical behavioral questions that are just great to kind of practice with and really anticipate when you have these interviews. And then there's last bullet, when following up with a recruiter, I don't think it's necessarily a requirement, but personally, after every round, I follow up with my recruiter. I kind of let him know, what my thoughts were, what my kind of headspace was overall, and we just had that open line of communication. After my one-way video interviews, I had another series of behavioral and case prep interviews. Different types of interviews, these were specific individuals from Facebook. For either asking me.
Sorry, Richard. Excuse me. We cannot hear you clearly. Maybe you have a bad signal or phone or something.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can.
Sorry for the
I can move
interruption.
Yeah. Do you remember what was the last part you heard?
It should be at practice work, right? Something, right?
You might want to jump off and then jump back on and see if you get a better connection.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Okay, I'll do that.
So while Richard is reconnecting, do you have any questions? If you have any questions, please feel free to type in the chat, or we will have a half an hour or 10 minutes QA session after his presentation. Thank you. Hi, Richard, you have been muted.
Yes. Can you all hear me now? Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. I will jump back into the presentation.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. I can just. Do you all remember what was the last thing you all heard me talking about?
I think last term I heard is about practice.
Okay. Was it on this slide or was it the previous slide?
Oh, no, I think it's just the starting of these slides, and then it becomes very fuzzy.
Okay, gotcha. Yes, I'll just go back over this slide. Again, in every interview, I think it's super important just to know the company's mission and the job description, and not only being able to know it, but being able to internalize it and reflect on how you will further the mission of that company throughout your specific role. My first, I guess, step within the interview process were one-way video interviews, where basically I signed into a platform and where I was provided about 4 or 5 questions just on the screen, and then I had to record myself and respond to those questions. Thankfully, I was provided some prep documents via email prior to this round of interviews, and so as you are interviewing, if you do receive any prep documents, make sure that you are thoroughly examining them. Make sure you know them inside and out, upside down, every which way possible, because I do think that they provide a lot of guidance and insight into how the interview can go and some of the questions that you will specifically be asked. I think that it's also super important to think about the various experiences that you've had up to this point, and be able to speak on multiple of them when you are being asked these questions. And so for myself, I talked about my startup experience. I talked about my experience in my co-ops. I talked about my experience doing capstone, but just had a variety of things that I could kind of pick from depending on whatever question I received, to just be able to have a variety of things to talk about. Regarding behavioral questions, these are, again, really asking, how have you responded in certain interactions? And so they might be, tell me about a time when you have worked on a team, or tell me about a time when you were leading a project and then you had to pivot your approach, or tell me about a time that you experienced failure, or things of that nature. And so being able to, routinely practice those questions and become familiar with how you're going to respond to them, I think is a great way to really prepare for the one-way video interviews. This last bullet isn't necessarily a requirement. I did it as a courtesy, but after every stage, I followed up with my recruiter. I let him know, what my thoughts were, how I felt that the interview went, and just things of that nature, just to have that open line of communication. After that, I moved on to the next round, which were a series of behavioral and case interviews. And so again, I started, I started examining the provided prep documents, and just really familiarizing myself with those. As it relates specific to behavioral and case prep interviews, I also reached out to other people who had previously completed these types of interviews before. I didn't think that I had this experience prior to this whole interviewing process, and so figuring out that this was going to happen very quickly, I reached out to people who had been through the experience and really worked with them and did practice questions with them and things of that nature, just to know that I was feeling familiar with the types of questions that I was going to receive. I also made use of the online resources and websites for practice, and I would really emphasize looking for the free resources that are available. I know that a lot of websites and platforms will have paywalls and ask you to enter in credit card information. And I think that that's definitely something that you can choose to do if you want. But I do think that there are a plethora of free, resources and things that are available on the internet for you to kind of make use of. This next thing that I'll talk about is what I call, I guess, the SPSIL framework. And this is really how I responded to my behavioral interviews. A lot of times, if you were to Google behavioral interview, you would see something called the STAR method. And I know that that's worked for a lot of people in being able to just talk about how their experiences have impacted them and how they responded in specific experiences. I looked at the STAR method. I personally did not think that it was the best way for me to reflect my insight and my experiences. And so I tweaked the STAR method to reflect these 5 key areas. 1, situation; 2, problem; 3, solution; 4, impact; and then 5, learning. As it relates to the situation, at this point, it's really detailing what is going on, what's the situation, catching everyone up to speed on a baseline level of what the overall situation in the environment is. After establishing commonality or common understanding of the situation, I then jumped into the problem that was being experienced. I talked about, did production slow down, or did a partner drop out, or whatever the problem was. I made sure that I detailed, what happened there, and just made sure that I clearly conveyed everything that was going on. As we get to the solution aspect, talk about how did you go from problem to solution? What ideas did you have? What opportunities did you think were available for you? What specific tactics did you make use of to get to an eventual solution? Really detail how did you go from problem to multiple options, and then ultimately one solution, or multiple solutions, just depending on what the kind of situation is. After solution, I thought it would be great to talk about what impact did this solution have, not only on the team I was working on in the larger organization, but also what impact did it have on myself. I think that this shows that the work that you've done isn't necessarily meaningless, but it had some value and it delivered something to someone, which is really great to convey in your previous experiences. And then lastly, talk about what did you learn from the experience, whether it was a good experience or a bad experience. Again, all the time, things didn't work. So some things go great and some things go not as planned. But I think being able to pull out, what did you learn from the experience is something that's actually really great to kind of reflect on, and it shows that you can kind of take a step back and look at things from more of a bird's eye view. And then again, with all of this, just make sure that you are consistently practicing. Make sure that you are doing mock interviews. Make sure that you are just prepared so that when the time comes for you to conduct your interview, that you are ready to hit the ground running and dominate this process. At this point, I'm going to talk about Super Day interviews, which are frankly the longest stretch of interviews that I think I've actually ever done. My Super Day interviews were about 3.5 hours. I didn't really have any breaks in between. I'm sure that had I asked people for like a bathroom break or a break to go get a drink of water, I would like to think that they would have said yes. But in my specific situation, I didn't have any breaks. I interviewed from about 2 to 5:30, I think, was on my actual interview day. And so it was very long, and it was also on a Friday, and so I was kind of ready for the weekend, but just mentally prepare for a long spurt of interviews that are pretty much back to back. I think it's really important to breathe and relax throughout this overall process and experience, because they're testing how can you respond to constant questions and varying data points and things of that nature, especially over a pretty lengthy period of time. I think that when you're talking about whether your behavioral experiences or even just having common conversation with your interviewers, it's great to talk about your interest and your passion for this role and just in being at the specific company. I think doing that, it allows you to just kind of stay true to yourself and just be your authentic person, just whoever you are, because that's ultimately who the company is seeking to hire. Again, after every round and even after my Super Day interviews, I followed up with my recruiter, and I also had the option to follow up with my interviewers. I didn't hear back from any of my interviewers, and I think that's pretty typical. But I just dropped a short note just saying, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed talking about X, Y, and Z. I look forward to the next steps, or things of that nature. After I completed my Super Day interviews, I had a clarifying conversation with my recruiter just to make sure that I understood what the opportunity was, what specific teams were available for me to join. And I had that conversation with them just to make sure that there was a clear understanding of things. And then, again, at this point, I had some other offers at the same time. And so I had to weigh them, and I had to really be transparent with myself, and we'll talk a bit more about that in the next couple of slides. But then I made the decision to accept the offer at Facebook. And then after that, I kept all the key stakeholders informed and really expressed gratitude for everyone that helped me throughout the process, because I definitely could not have done it by myself, but I was super grateful for the people who supported me and just really provided a lot of resources and guidance for me throughout the overall process. So my decision process was a bit interesting, if you will. I ultimately had several offers, which that in itself is just very much a blessing, and I didn't really expect that this was going to happen for me. I ultimately had offers from Facebook, Tesla, Lockheed Martin, UPS, Brown-Forman, a few startups, and some other organizations. And it was pretty interesting because I don't know if they all worked together, but it felt like all the offer letters kind of happened all at once, which I was like, it was like information overload, and I didn't really know how to respond, how to internalize all of this. And I was just looking for a job and didn't really think that all of this would happen all at once. I definitely think that when that happened, I was very confused on what I was going to do. I was just trying to figure out which way am I going to go, which option am I going to select. And I was able to talk with some of my personal advisors and some of my family and things of that nature. And I think that they really encouraged me to think about why am I going to each of these, why did I apply to each of these specific roles and opportunities. And I think that when I took a step back and thought about, why did I want to work at these specific companies, and what did I want to gain from these experiences, it made things a lot clearer to just ultimately understand which option made the most sense for me. I also considered what resources were available at these companies to help me upskill, and know that just like over time, if the opportunity does present itself that I take a different job or want to jump into a different role within the same organization, that there would be opportunities and skills for me to learn, so that I don't feel like I'm necessarily stagnant within my current position. I also evaluated the culture at these various organizations and tried to figure out, how do people work together, and what is work-life balance kind of like, and how do I feel like I would best fit into each of these organizations, and just what do I think would honestly make me the happiest. And so after evaluating all of those things and just really understanding, the data points and information available to myself, that made my decision process a lot clearer, just to ultimately result in me picking Facebook. I think personal stakeholders are super important, and I mentioned it in the previous slide to keep them in the loop of things, but I think it's very, very important to have personal stakeholders, have people who are helping you throughout the process, and really express a gratitude and thanks to them. For me, that included my family and some of my very close friends who were just like supporting me and just encouraging me to keep going throughout the interview process and not second guess myself and not really doubt that things weren't going to result in a good outcome. I also talked with Dr. Gerber a bit, and so really just like talking to her and really understanding the kind of what options are available for me was super helpful. It kind of helped put things into a larger perspective. There are also other university advisors that I worked with, my scholarship director, some of my other professors, and just other staff here at U of L, who I thought had great insight and just different perspectives that I could kind of take into consideration when making the decision. Kind of the same thing with the university advisors, but some of my personal advisors from programs that I've previously completed. I talked with them, and I just really remained transparent and authentic, and just like what my overall thought process was, and kind of what I was thinking about throughout this process, and trying to figure out which step made the most sense for me. This last bullet point, I call it the 10+ years roles, and this is essentially people that I don't personally know, but people who I've seen on LinkedIn who ideally are where I kind of want to be in about 5 or 10-ish years. And I think that looking at what their previous experiences have been like, just from their profiles and how they went from job A to job B to job C, seeing those threads and those commonalities provided also just like some other context for how I can kind of think about staging my professional journey. And so I think throughout all of this, it just helps make things a lot clearer in reaching an ultimate decision. There are a few things that I think went well and things that I definitely think could have gone better. I think some of the things that went well for me are just being able to reference multiple stories for the questions that were asked, and not feel like I'm only using one story to answer 5 questions, but I can use about 3 or 4 stories and expose that I had a variety and a plethora of experiences up to this point. I think that when times were very pressuring, I think I did a really good job at remaining just like my authentic self and just being who I am. I think that was just a showcase of like who I am, what matters to me, kind of what makes me happy and things of that nature. And I think I was really good at conveying that to my interviewers. I think again, just going throughout those interview methods, like tying all of my takeaways and all my thoughts to the Facebook mission specifically, really helped display the narrative that I'm focused on, working at Facebook, and I'm really excited about the opportunity and the position. And then even in responding to the questions, again, mentioning specific data points, being able to provide tangible information, I think was really good for me. to reference from my previous experiences. And then again, I don't think that it necessarily made a final decision for me, but just following up with my recruiter after each stage was, I think, a great thing for me to do, because it just kind of kept that line of communication open. I know a lot of times, with recruiters, you might just kind of interact with them just for the next meeting being scheduled. I think my recruiter and I don't know how many emails we had that went back and forth between us, but we just had an open line of communication throughout the entire process, and I think that really helps provide some clarity and insight into how the interview process was going to go. I do think that some things that could have gone better for me, which is taking deeper breaths during the interview and also during this current presentation. I think deeper breaths kind of allows some oxygen to kind of go to your brain and just kind of think about where you are and what the current situation is, and just to feel that you are in control of how you're responding and how the interview is going overall. I think also internalizing the questions before responding is something that I could have done a better job at doing. That way, it would have just shown more reflection on my end. It would have allowed me to think of what my response was going to be before actually responding to the question. And then I think, especially regarding the decision-making process, I think had I thought about what purpose did I want to have in the specific roles before accepting, I think doing that a bit earlier would have provided more clarity for me, and it would have been less of a headache throughout the overall process. But I do think that just like in total, these are some things I could have just done a bit better. Right here is my LinkedIn and my UofL email. If any of you would like to reach out to me or would like to connect. And yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. I'm super happy to answer any questions. I know that with the technical difficulties, we ran a bit longer than anticipated. But I'm happy to answer any questions about anything I talked about or anything as it relates to Facebook or things of that nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and thanks for all the details you shared with us, especially those instructions. And these are very detailed, and I believe our students can benefit from your talk. And is there any questions from the audience?
Hey, Richard, great job. I was curious how for your comments on how prepared you feel like you were from your experience at U of L, and whether it's good or bad, either way. But just curious about how you feel you're prepared and competing now in a different arena.
Yeah. So just to make sure I understand the question, your question is ultimately asking me like how do I feel that my experiences at U of L have prepared me to work at Facebook? Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. So I think that especially being in speed school, really having to solve problems all the time that do not have a clear answer every time. I think that really provided some insight into what it's kind of like to work, I guess, like in corporate, if you will. Just because there isn't like always a right answer. There's oftentimes you're just coming up with a solution, and hopefully it is the best solution. And then there are a lot of other things to consider in terms of time and money and other people and their resources and things of that nature. So I think that definitely the capstone experience was super impactful because again, there wasn't a clear answer on like what the final result would be. And there are also a variety of experiences where things didn't go exactly how we hoped that they would go. And so I think that having that prior exposure between capstone and co-op experiences, and even just like class projects, kind of got me in the routine to sort of anticipate variety or challenges that would kind of like appear in just like working at Facebook.
Okay, any other question from the audience?
I saw a question in the chat. It says, could you please talk about the case interview, about scenario given to you or what type of problem you will solve? Yeah. So thank you for that question. Case interviews are ultimately asking sort of if you are in a specific situation, hypothetically, how would you respond? Well, how would you respond in the situation? What change would you make? And so I don't think I can share like the specific question that I received just to like the NDAs and things that I signed. But like a hypothetical situation could be like, say you are the manager of a plant and revenue falls 10% in the third quarter. What do you do? And that's pretty much that's all that is initially presented to you. You know, you can definitely ask your interviewer questions just for more clarity, and they often will have additional insight that they will provide you if you do ask the right questions. But I definitely think with case interviews, that was very different from co-op interviews. I largely prepare for case interviews with online resources, and then again, and just talking to people that I was able to reach out to who had previously, interviewed before via the case interview method. For me, I think that in full transparency, I don't even know if getting the right answer per se is what they're looking for. I think the bigger thing is to consider your approach and your communication as to like why you reached the result that you did. And so whether you say that you would, look at the staffing plan, or whether you say that you would, shut down the plant for X number of days to do an internal audit or approach a consultant, whatever your answer is, I think the more important thing is to communicate effectively. Why is that your approach? And really just make sure that you're keeping people, on the same page as you, when explaining why you reached your answer. I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, please let me know in the chat or hop off mute, and I can definitely talk a bit more. Another question that I received in the chat is, as someone with many mentors, what are some tips you would give to students looking to get mentored? Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that ultimately with mentorship, I think part of it can kind of be a bit humbling in a sense, especially when you don't really know where to start. I think that, and I was actually talking to Dr. Gerber about this, not too long ago, but I think early on in undergrad, I adopted the mentality of what is the worst possible situation. I felt that my worst possible situation is that, I don't hear back from someone that I reach out to, or that a relationship that I try to develop doesn't necessarily stick, or things of that nature. And I felt that if I was okay with that, then I would be okay with anything that is a more positive, I guess, reaction from that. And so with just mentorship as a whole, I think it's super important to display that you're always you're a continuous learner. Just being able to say that you don't know everything and that you're open to learning from other people who have more experiences than you, I think is a great way to showcase that you're someone that's worth mentoring, and someone that's worth building a relationship with. And even after having an initial relationship, I think it's super great to over time maintain that relationship, whether it's just in like quarterly emails with someone just about your recent updates, or just reaching out and just like asking questions about things that you think someone may or may not have specific expertise in. Because the other thing with mentorship is if you ask, and I found that if you ask someone about something that they don't specifically have a knowledge in, they can also reach to their own network of individuals and then find someone who does have that specific knowledge, and then really be able to make that connection or relay that information for you to help you grow, just like as an individual. Yeah, another question that I received is since there are a couple of our professors who are on, what class or classes do you think were most beneficial outside of the classroom? Yeah, let's see. I think Capstone, well, because that was like structurally outside of the classroom. And I think that entire experience was I mean, it was kind of formative. It was kind of like, you just like, here you go, like here's the start line, and then I hope you figure it out. And we definitely had the guidance from Dr. Usher throughout that, but I think that really forced us to grow in a lot of ways and to think, think about things, in a different light, if you will. And so I think that sort of experiential knowledge and learning was great to kind of have, and be able to, further on going from, the capstone research project to now more of a full-time role. I think that, definitely, I think courses with, Dr. Salim and Dr. Gerber were also good in terms of just figuring out how to think. And I think that I relay a lot of my thought processes at Facebook in terms of just like thinking about how to solve problems. I think being in, an engineering, I guess, mentality, or I guess like thinking framework, if you will, really is a different perspective that you can relay, especially when working cross-functionally with other teams. And so, like for myself, like I work with like other engineers. I work with marketing. I work with some people in product development, and just like a bunch of different teams. But being able to kind of think specifically on how I see things, and also being able to internalize how other people see things, I think is just like a great way to sort of see problems like holistically. And I think a lot of that framework kind of came from, the courses with Dr. Slim and Dr. Gerber.
Okay, so if you have more questions, please directly contact Richard. And now it's time to finish our seminar. And thank you for the great talk, Richard, and thanks for all the suggestions you provided for our audience. And let's thank again for Richard's talk, and let's call it a day.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you all so much. I appreciate being here. I appreciate you all taking the time out of your all's busy days just to kind of hear me talk for about an hour. But yeah, again, if there's anything that I can kind of dive deeper on, I'll just drop my contact information in this chat.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, definitely feel free to reach out to me via my UofL email or my LinkedIn.
Well, thank you. Yeah, sure. I believe there will be someone else who will contact you in future. And I'm looking forward to see you in person in future.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Great job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you. It's definitely something.
Bye.
Let me jump over.